The acrid smoke was a living thing. It clawed at her throat, a predator of heat and chemicals, turning out every gasp for air into a sip of poison. Her world had shrunk to the screaming protest of tearing metal, the roar of the nascent fire, and the dead weight of the man she was dragging away from it. He was heavy, a limp, boneless anchor of unconscious flesh, and her muscles, already screaming from a 9-hour shift of lifting crates, shrieked in a fresh agony. 20 feet. That was the goal. 20 feet felt like a marathon across a desert of broken glass and hot asphalt. His shoes scraped against the pavement, a rhythmic dragging sound that was almost lost beneath the violent crackle of the inferno she was pulling him from. The car, a sleek, futuristic vessel just moments before, was now a mangled beast of burning plastic and groaning steel. Its lithium-ion heart was beginning a terrifying thermal runaway. Just a little further, she begged her own body. Her lungs burned. Her eyes, streaming from the smoke, could barely see. The man's head lolled, a gash on his forehead painting his face with a grotesque crimson mask. She risked a glance back. The small flame she had first seen licking at the engine compartment had become a greedy, ravenous maw of orange and yellow. The heat was a physical blow, a solid wall she was fighting against. It baked her skin, turning the soot on her face into a crusty, tight mask. From somewhere in the blurry darkness behind her, a voice, thin and distant, yelled, "Get away from there! It's gonna blow!" The warning was redundant. She could feel the gonna blow in her bones, a deep, resonant hum that vibrated up from the asphalt into the soles of her worn-out sneakers. It was the sound of imminent, violent transformation. With a final, desperate surge of adrenaline-fueled strength, she heaved him backward. 1 step, 2. Her foot slipped on a patch of slick fluid, oil or coolant, she didn't know, and she went down, landing hard on her hip. But she didn't let go. Her grip on the man's jacket, a surprisingly soft leather now smeared with her own grime, and his blood, was a vice. That stumble saved her. The whoosh was less a sound and more a sudden violent displacement of the universe. A column of incandescent fury erupted from the Tesla, punching a hole in the quiet Texas night. The shockwave, a fist of superheated air, slammed into her, rolling her and the man across the rough shoulder of the highway like discarded dolls. For a moment, there was only the ringing in her ears, and the blinding white-hot image seared onto the backs of her eyelids. She lay there, stunned, the smell of burnt hair, her own, filling her nostrils. She pushed herself up, her body a symphony of new aches. The man beside her hadn't moved. Frantic, she pressed 2 trembling, soot-stained fingers against his neck, searching for the delicate flutter of life beneath the skin. There. Weak, thready, but undeniably there. A pulse. A wave of relief so profound it was nauseating washed over her. She had done it. She had pulled a life back from the brink of a roaring fire. As the wail of approaching sirens finally sliced through the night, Maya Ramirez, 28-year-old caregiver and supermarket stalker, lay on the dirty asphalt and allowed herself a single shuddering sob, completely unaware that in saving this man's life, she had just set her own on fire. 24 hours earlier, the fluorescent lights of the Price Point supermarket hummed a monotonous, soul-draining tune. It was the official soundtrack to Maya's life, a low-grade electrical buzz that promised nothing but the slow, steady passage of time. At 8:55 p.m., she was in aisle 6, the canned goods aisle, performing a practiced ballet of commercial logistics. Grab a can of diced tomatoes, check the expiration date, turn the label to face perfectly forward, and place it on the shelf. Repeat. Her movements were a study in weary efficiency. She was good at this job, a fact that brought her no pride, only a dull ache of resignation. She could stock a pallet of non-perishables in under 20 minutes, and build a promotional display for tortilla chips that was a minor marvel of structural integrity. These were her skills. This was her art form. A customer, an elderly woman with a cloud of white hair and eyes that swam behind thick glasses, paused her cart beside her. "Excuse me, dear," she said, her voice frail. "I can't seem to reach the coconut milk." Maya's face, etched with fatigue, softened instantly. "Of course," she said, her voice warm. She stood, her back giving a slight twinge of protest, and easily retrieved the can from the top shelf. Here you go. Are you making a curry? The woman beamed. I am, for my grandson. It's his favorite. I hope he loves it, Maya said, a genuine smile briefly erasing the weariness. The smile vanished as soon as she saw him. Mr. Gerald Henderson, the store manager, stood at the end of the aisle, his arms crossed over his polo-shirted chest. His posture radiated a displeasure so profound it seemed to warp the very air around him. He waited until the customer was gone before ambling toward Maya, his shoes squeaking on the linoleum. He didn't acknowledge her kindness to the customer. He didn't say hello. He simply pointed a stubby finger at the shelf she had just perfected. Ramirez, he began, his voice a low, grating drawl. I see a can of garbanzo beans, second row from the top, third from the left. That is approximately 5 degrees off center. 5 degrees. Maya blinked, looking at the offending can. He was right, of course. He was always right about these things. Precision is profit, Ramirez, he continued, leaning in as if sharing a great secret of the universe. Do you think our customers pay for almost? Do you think they come to Price Point for a good enough shopping experience? No, they come for the crisp, reassuring right angles of well-stocked merchandise. She simply nodded, her gaze fixed on the can. I'll fix it, Mr. Henderson. See that you do, he said. He glanced at the large clock on the wall. Your shift ends in 5 minutes. And remember, overtime is theft. You're stealing from the company's bottom line. He turned and walked away, his squeaking shoes a departing punctuation mark on his petty tyranny. Maya took a deep breath, the sterile, refrigerated air doing little to cool the hot spark of resentment in her chest. She reached out, her fingers closing around the can of garbanzo beans, and rotated it 5 degrees until it was perfect. Driving home in her 2008 Honda Civic, a car that rattled like a can of bolts but had never once failed her, Maya felt the tension in her shoulders begin to ease. The fluorescent hum of the store was replaced by the familiar rattle of her car and the soft glow of the dashboard. She hit the call button on her cheap hands-free device. Hey, Izzy, she said as the call connected. Hey, superstar stalker, came the cheerful, slightly raspy voice of her 16-year-old sister, Isabel. Did you vanquish the evil forces of crooked soup cans today? Maya laughed, a real unforced sound. I did. Aisle 6 is now safe for all citizens. How are you feeling? Did you use the nebulizer? Feeling good? And yes, Mom, I did my breathing treatment, Isabel said, her tone light but laced with the practiced patience of someone who has answered that question thousands of times. Isabel had been diagnosed with cystic fibrosis as a child, and her health was the central, non-negotiable axis around which Maya's entire world revolved. It was the reason for the dead-end job, the threadbare apartment, the constant, gnawing anxiety that lived in the pit of her stomach. What do you want for dinner? Maya asked, changing the subject. I can pick something up. Could we have that mac and cheese, the fancy kind with the breadcrumbs? Isabel asked, a hopeful note in her voice. The fancy kind it is, Maya promised, a wave of affection washing over her. She would do anything for that kid. She would work 100 shifts for 100 Hendersons if it meant Isabel could have the life she deserved. It was in the middle of this warm, ordinary moment that her world tilted on its axis. Ahead of her, in the sparse oncoming traffic of the 2-lane highway, a car, sleek, dark, and impossibly fast, seemed to flicker under the orange streetlights. It swerved, a sudden, violent movement, as if dodging a ghost. The driver overcorrected. For a horrifying, silent second, the car was suspended sideways, its headlights sweeping across Maya's field of vision, blinding her. Then came the sickening, final sound of metal meeting ancient oak. The impact was brutal. The Tesla, for that's what she now saw it was, crumpled like a tin can, its front end wrapped around the unyielding trunk of the tree. Maya slammed on her brakes, her Honda fishtailing slightly. The phone call was forgotten. Her heart hammered against her ribs, a frantic drumbeat of terror. Other cars were slowing, their red taillights painting the scene in a demonic glow, their occupants gawking from the safety of their mobile cocoons. No one was stopping. Smoke, thick and black, began to pour from the mangled hood of the Tesla. Izzy, I have to go, Maya said, her voice strained. "Something's happened. I'll call you back. I love you." She didn't wait for a reply. She yanked her car onto the gravel shoulder, her mind a frantic scramble of calculations. Fire. Electric car. Danger. But overriding all of it was a single, flashing imperative. There's someone in there. She fumbled under her seat for the small fire extinguisher her dad had insisted she keep in her car, a relic of his time as a volunteer firefighter. "You never know, Mija," he used to say. "It's better to have it and not need it than to need it and not have it." Her father was gone, but his wisdom remained. Grasping the cool metal cylinder, Maya kicked open her door and ran. The night air was suddenly cold, but the scene before her was about to get very, very hot. She was running toward the fire, every instinct screaming at her to run away. But the thought of someone trapped inside, helpless, was a gravitational pull she couldn't fight. She was her father's daughter, after all. The driver's side door was hopelessly jammed, the metal bent into a new, unworkable shape. Through the window she could see him, a man in a nice jacket, slumped forward, his face obscured by a deployed airbag. He wasn't moving. Panic tried to seize her, a cold, paralyzing grip. She fought it down with a surge of adrenaline. The smoke was thicker now, and she could see the terrifying orange flicker of flames from beneath the car. She remembered snippets of articles she'd read online about electric vehicle fires, how they were different, hotter, harder to extinguish. She hammered the handle of the fire extinguisher against the tempered glass of the window. It bounced off with a dull thud. Again, a crack appeared. Again, the window became a spider web of fractures. From behind her, a teenage boy, who had finally decided to get out of his car, was filming, his phone held aloft like a sacred totem. "You should get away from there," he shouted, his voice cracking. "It's gonna blow." Maya tuned him out. The world was noise, and she was focused on a single signal. With a guttural yell that tore from her throat, she brought the extinguisher down one last time. The glass imploded, showering the car's interior with glittering, dangerous confetti. The heat washed over her face, more intense now. She reached through the broken window, her arms scraping against the sharp edges, and fumbled for the interior door lock. It clicked. She wrenched the handle from the outside and pulled. The door groaned open with a scream of tortured metal. The man's seatbelt was cinched tight across his chest, the buckle mechanism crushed in the impact. It wouldn't budge. The flames were growing, no longer just licking, but chewing their way through the car's front end. Think, Maya, think. The multi-tool. A cheap promotional gift from an auto parts store that her dad had put on her keychain years ago. Her fingers, slick with sweat, fumbled in her pocket. She pulled it out, flicking open the small, serrated blade. It was a pathetic weapon against the thick nylon of the seatbelt, but it was all she had. She sawed a frantic, desperate motion. The blade bit into the fabric. One strand snapped, then another. The heat was blistering now, the air shimmering around her. The smell of burning rubber and plastic was overwhelming. Finally, with a sound like a gunshot, the belt tore free. He was heavier than he looked. She hooked her arms under his, her feet scrabbling for purchase, and pulled. He was dead weight. Every inch was a victory. She dragged him backward, away from the roaring, consuming fire, her body screaming in protest. It was then that she heard the deep, menacing hum, felt the vibration through the ground, and glanced back, just in time to be thrown by the force of the explosion. Lying on the asphalt, the ringing in her ears slowly subsiding, she felt the man's pulse. Alive. He was alive. The approaching sirens were the most beautiful sound she had ever heard. In the chaos of the moment, as flashing red and blue lights began to dance across the wreckage, she didn't notice that her phone, which had fallen from her pocket during the struggle, lay near the burning wreck, its plastic casing slowly melting into an unrecognizable lump. The aftermath was a blur of detached professionalism. Paramedics in crisp uniforms swarmed the man, their movements efficient, their voices calm and clipped as they called out readings and statuses. Maya, standing off to the side, suddenly felt like an intruder at a private party. She was covered in soot, her knuckles were bleeding, and a large tear marred the knee of her work pants. She had never felt more invisible. A police officer eventually ambled over to her. He was older, with a weary face and a gut that strained against the fabric of his uniform. He held a clipboard like a shield. This was Officer Miller. You're the one who pulled him out? He asked, his tone flat, devoid of curiosity or admiration. He looked her up and down, his gaze lingering on her torn clothes. Yes, Maya said, her voice raspy from the smoke. You shouldn't have done that, Miller stated, not cruelly, but as a simple point of fact. Civilian interference in an active emergency scene. You could have been killed. You could have paralyzed him by moving him. You should always wait for professionals. The words hit her like a slap. A hot flush of indignation rose in her chest. The car was on fire, she said, her voice trembling slightly. It exploded. He would be dead. Miller just grunted, as if she had presented a minor, irrelevant detail. Name? He asked, poised to write on his form. He took down her statement with a series of bored ticks and scribbles. His questions focused on the mechanics of the crash, not the heroism of the rescue. Did you see the vehicle before the initial impact? Can you estimate its speed? He showed all the emotional investment of a man taking a lunch order. When he was done, he capped his pen. All right, you can go. We'll be in touch if we need anything else. And that was it. No thank you. No good job. No acknowledgement of the life-altering risk she had just taken. As the ambulance pulled away, its lights flashing but its siren now silent, Maya was left alone on the side of the road next to her rattling Honda. She felt hollowed out, drained, and strangely, inexplicably ashamed. She had just stared death in the face and won, and the world had responded with a shrug and a bureaucratic form. The next morning, her body felt like one giant bruise. Sleep had been a series of fitful, smoke-filled nightmares. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw the flames, heard the roar. She was 10 minutes late clocking in for her 8 a.m. shift at Price Point. Before she could even get to her locker, she was intercepted. Ramirez, my office, now. Henderson's voice cut through the morning haze of the store. The walk to his cramped office felt like a walk to the gallows. The Teamwork Makes the Dream Work poster on his wall hung slightly crooked, a small daily monument to irony. He didn't ask her to sit. He gestured to the chair with a flick of his wrist. You're late, he began, foregoing any preamble. 10 minutes. That's 10 minutes of labor you owe this company. 10 minutes of profit flushed away by your lack of discipline. Maya opened her mouth to explain, to tell him about the crash, the fire, the man's life hanging in the balance, but he held up a hand, a fleshy stop sign. Ah, but it gets better, he said, a strange, triumphant glint in his eye. It seems I've been made aware of an incident last night. An incident involving a vehicle fire, an incident where a Price Point employee, he spat the words out, potentially identifiable as such, inserted herself into a dangerous situation. Maya's blood ran cold. How did you... The internet, Ramirez. A magical place. It seems you're a local hero. The word hero dripped with sarcasm. But you know what you are to me? A liability. Mr. Henderson, I had to, she pleaded, her voice quiet. The man would have died. Henderson leaned forward, his face a mask of condescending pity. What you had to do, Ramirez, was adhere to the employee handbook you signed upon your hiring. Section 12, subsection B. Employee conduct off-duty. It clearly states that employees are to avoid any situation that could lead to liability or reflect poorly on the Price Point brand. You are not a first responder. You are a stock clerk. The injustice of it was a physical blow, knocking the air from her lungs. Reflect poorly? I saved a human life. How does that reflect poorly on anyone? A cruel smirk played on Henderson's lips. You created a risk, an unacceptable risk. What if you were injured? That's a potential workers' comp claim we'd have to fight. What if the man you saved decides to sue you for aggravated injuries because of how you pulled him out of the car? And what if his lawyer names Price Point in that lawsuit because you were wearing your work jacket? You don't think of these things, do you, Ramirez? You think of glory. Well, we don't pay you for glory. He straightened up, his decision made. He slid a piece of paper across the desk. It was a termination form, the ink a stark, brutal black. Due to your tardiness and your gross, willful violation of company policy, your employment is terminated, effective immediately. He added one final, petty twist of the knife. And your final paycheck will be docked for your tardiness this morning. Security will escort you from the premises." Maya stared at the paper, the words blurring through a sudden film of tears. It wasn't possible. This couldn't be happening. She had saved a man from a fire, and for that, she was being punished in the cruelest way imaginable. The fluorescent lights of the office seemed to hum louder now, a mocking, triumphant buzz. Her apartment felt different when she walked in at 8:45 in the morning. It felt like a failure. The familiar sight of Isabel's books on the coffee table, the faded family photos on the wall. It all seemed to mock her. She sank onto their lumpy sofa, the pink slip crumpled in her fist, and the carefully constructed dam of her composure finally broke. Isabel emerged from her bedroom, her face etched with concern. "Maya, what's wrong? You're home early." Through choked sobs, Maya told her everything. The horrific crash, the intense heat, the man's unconscious face, Officer Miller's cold dismissal, and finally, Henderson's final brutal act of cruelty. Isabel's initial shock morphed into a fierce, protective anger. He what? He can't do that. That's insane. But then the anger was quickly eclipsed by the same cold fear that was now gripping Maya's own heart. Isabel's eyes, wide and suddenly vulnerable, darted to the small basket on the kitchen counter where they kept her medications. "My refill," she whispered. "The copay is over $200. It's next week." The reality of their situation crashed down on Maya with the force of a physical blow. Her job wasn't just a job. It was Isabel's lifeline. It was the health insurance, however mediocre. It was the steady, if meager, paycheck that kept the lights on and the pharmacy paid. Now it was gone. She pulled her terrified sister into a hug, trying to project a strength she didn't feel. "We'll figure it out, Izzy," she whispered into her hair. "I promise. We'll figure it out." But as she looked at the stack of bills on their small kitchen table, it was a promise she had no idea how to keep. Miles away, in the hushed, antiseptic environment of an Austin General Hospital room, David Chen surfaced from a fog of pain and confusion. The first thing he saw was the anxious, beloved face of his wife, Emily. The first thing he felt was the fiery protest of his cracked ribs. "Em," he rasped, his throat dry. "Oh, David. Thank God," she breathed, her hand clutching his. His mind was a jumble of shattered images, a tree, the screech of tires, the sickening crunch of metal. But one image was clear, emerging from the chaos like a beacon. A face, a woman's face, framed by darkness, streaked with soot, her eyes wide with fear and a ferocious determination. "The woman," he said, his voice urgent, pushing past the pain. "The one who pulled me out. The car was on fire. I remember the fire. Is she okay? Who was she?" A doctor, a man named Evans with a clipboard and a clinical air of detachment, entered the room. "Mr. Chen, good to see you with us," he said, checking his vitals. "You have a moderate concussion and 3 fractured ribs. You're very lucky." "The woman," David insisted, trying to sit up, a move that sent a bolt of agony through his torso. "Did anyone get her name?" Dr. Evans waved a dismissive hand. "Your focus should be on your recovery, Mr. Chen. The police report mentioned a witness who rendered aid. They took her statement. I'm sure it's all in order." He showed no more interest in Maya's identity than Officer Miller had in her heroism. David's frustration mounted. "She didn't just render aid, she saved my life," he said, his voice rising. "My life! I need to find her. I need to thank her." He turned to his wife, his eyes pleading. "Emily, please, call the police, check the news. Something." At that very moment, a video file was being shared across social media platforms. The shaky phone footage, shot by a teenager more interested in viral fame than in helping, was titled, "Crazy Tesla Fire, Woman Pulls Driver Out Seconds Before Explosion." The woman's face was mostly obscured by shadow and smoke, but her actions were crystal clear. In the anonymous, chaotic world of the internet, she was already being given a name: the Anonymous Angel of Austin. The narrative of her heroism was beginning to build, a force of nature entirely separate from her own private despair. The world was celebrating an angel, while Maya Ramirez was contemplating how she was going to afford her sister's next dose of medicine.